Meet Henry. Henry pastors a small church and wonders how he's ever going to reach more people and get his church to grow. One day, while surfing the internet, Henry came across the Laser Church evangelism coaching strategy and learned about a concept called Oikos. He heard Tom say that an Oikos is made up of 8 to 15 people God has supernaturally and strategically placed in your life, and that he wants to reach them through the one thing they all have in common: you. While watching Laser Church, Henry learned that 95% of all Christians come to faith because of an Oikos relationship. 95%. Henry began using the coaching, tools, and resources provided in the Laser Church modules to get his church laser focused on their mission. The result? People were baptized, lives were transformed, and the church began to grow. The Laser Church Oikos evangelism strategy, it transformed Henry's church, and it can change yours as well. So download Laser Church today and discover the simple system of world change that has helped hundreds of pastors around the world grow their church and reach more people, 8 to 15 at a time.
We're privileged to be joined by Tom Mercer, the pastor of the High Desert Church up in Victorville, California, and he's the author of a couple of books, 8 to 15, The World is Smaller Than You Think, and Common Sense is the New Brilliance. He and his wife Cheryl have 3 children and 8 grandkids, and we are privileged to have him here with us today. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Chad.
Hey, I want to jump right in here because this book, 8 to 15, The World is Smaller Than You Think, I've read it multiple times, and many pastors around the world literally have done this. And in this book, you talk about a premise, a concept, a big idea, so to speak, called oikos. What is it?
Oikos is a Greek word that refers to a group of people. Actually, the word can refer to 2 things. It can refer to an actual physical house, or it can refer to the people who live inside of that house. And the house picture that the Greek word paints for us is the group of people that we do life with on a regular basis. I use the term front burner often in my teaching. Seems like we have hundreds of relationships at any given point in time. But there seem to be, at least, anywhere from 8 to 15 people who are on the front burner. That is, they are right in front of us all the time. God has placed them there. We didn't ask for many of them. Maybe we didn't ask for any of them. But I believe that they are all there by divine appointment, and that frames really the purpose for this whole strategy that we've developed to reach people for Christ, is that God has supernaturally and strategically place them in our lives.
So in our world, who is our oikos?
Well, our oikos would be maybe our blood relationships. There are some that we'd be biologically related to who wouldn't be technically part of our oikos,
okay,
but if we interacted with them regularly,
okay,
they would be. Could be neighbors, could be classmates if you go to school,
okay,
could be people that you work with, people that you live in their neighborhoods, people that tend to know that you're a Christian, not just because you say you're a Christian, but because you own that claim and you live your life in such a way as to reflect an interest in following Christ.
In a couple minutes, we're going to come back to the management aspect of how we can manage our oikos. But before we do that, why is oikos? How did this become such a big deal in your personal life?
You know, when I was a youth pastor, this is long before we went to the high desert, but as a youth pastor, I had a very, very small youth group, and I was just cutting my teeth in vocational ministry. And my senior pastor asked if I would go to a seminar led by Dr. Win Arn, and I went along with my senior pastor where Dr. Arn presented the Oikos principle. And I was taken aback, again, by how simple it was, how powerful it was. I was bothered by the fact that I hadn't heard it before, because it seemed like such a logical idea and such a biblical idea. I had grown up in a pastor's family. I had attended Bible school and seminary. I was involved in church leadership vocationally, and yet that was the first time that I was confronted with the idea so clearly.
Right.
So after I kind of worked through the resentment of not having the opportunity to have heard it sooner, I got on board very quickly, began applying the principle with our youth group, which blew up in a good way. It grew very rapidly. We spent a number of years there in that youth ministry. And then when the Lord opened the door to come to the high desert and serve a small desert community church, as the senior pastor, I did the only thing I really knew to do and had learned to do, and took the Word of God and dovetailed it with the Oikos principle, and we began to grow and enjoy the ministry that He's given us there for over 30 years.
You talk a little bit in your book how Oikos is not a program, it's not a system, but yet it's a set of lenses that you see your world through. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I wear glasses now, as you can tell, and for 40-some years I didn't, and I didn't need to for most of that time, and then finally I gave in to my wife's encouragement, because she could see that my eyesight had diminished sufficiently to go to an optometrist. And I remember after the optometrist placed these lenses on the bridge of my nose, having the opportunity to see clearly again for the first time in a long time. And I realized at that moment that it's funny how your vision can dim and you don't even recognize it until you see clearly for the first time.
Right.
That's what the Oikos principle was for me. In fact, I called Dr. Orn my spiritual optometrist, because he helped me see things that I had lost sight of, and I think that the church had lost sight of. And Jesus gave us the principle. I think the church grew so rapidly in the first century because of the principle, and for whatever reason we abandoned it and began to develop our own evangelism programs, and have paid the price for it. We don't see Oikos. I don't see Oikos as a program. It's not an evangelism program. It's not a department in a local church ministry. It is a paradigm. It's a perspective. It is, as you say, a set of lenses that you put on and you see your entire life through. And you see ministry differently. You see your schedule differently. I read the scriptures differently. I teach the scriptures with a heightened sense of clarity, I believe, because of what the principle has provided me.
Now, in your book, as I was reading it, you talk about Oikos is the foundation for two English words, economy and ecology.
It's actually is the root for many other English words, but those two, if you put them together, they dovetail together to provide us a pretty clear idea of what an Oikos is. Ecology, or oikology, is the science of interaction of different elements in a natural community. Rocks, gases, plants, and how they interact with one another. Economy, or oikonomy, is the sound management of what you have jurisdiction over. And so we think of an economy being financial, which it certainly fits the definition of the word, but it also would describe those things that we have been given stewardship of relationally. And so when you look at the natural, the oikology side, with the management, the oikonomy side, put it together, and gives you a pretty good idea what an oikos is, just managing the natural relationships that God has placed on the front burners of our lives.
Do you think this can give churches clarity on their focus and mission?
There's no doubt it can. There are, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes, there are two sides to the Oikos principle. There's the personal side of understanding that people come to Christ most often through personal relationships, and if you want to reach people for Christ, you're going to employ this principle. But then there's the pastoral side, which is the role of facilitating the personal mission of those who attend our local churches. And so really we've seen this now, after presenting this principle for as long as we have, we see this principle both ways.
We'll come back to those perspectives in just a minute, but you talked about attendance at a local church. And it's interesting because doing some research, what we found out was Linda Lowry and Rebecca Barnes put together a report called A Close-Up Look at Church Attendance. And what they discovered was that previously we had thought that about 40% of Americans attended church on any given weekend, but what they found out was actually that number is a little closer to 20%. So not 4 out of 10, but 2 out of 10 actually go to church on Sunday, or typically Sunday morning. Is that a big deal?
Well, it certainly is indicative of a lot of things. Primarily, I think it is it's a commentary on what we have decided is the most important metrics in church leadership,
Attendance.
and that's the weekend attendance.
Right.
And if you want to use that metric, we fail miserably, because if 8 out of 10 Americans
Right.
refuse to come into a building like the ones we preach in and listen
Right.
to the messages we present, then we are falling woefully short of what God has called us to do. But the church, as you know, Chad, the church is not a place.
Okay.
The church is not a building. It's not a location. Jesus was very clear that the church is a group of people.
Okay.
We're the called out ones.
Okay.
It's not that the world has been called into a building. We, the church, have been called out to the world. And even though 2 out of 10 Americans attend a weekend service, 10 out of 10 Americans know someone who knows Christ. And so the church, the ecclesia, is connected with everybody in this country. So when I look at the way we have developed and grown up understanding church ministry, I see the weekend as a bottleneck.
Okay.
We expect everything to flow through the weekend. We expect everything to flow through us as church leaders. And that certainly has minimized the potential impact of the church. And so the goal through the Oikos principle, the goal is to give ministry away,
Okay.
to give it back to the people who actually can bring the kind of dynamic back to the church that we seem to have lost in our culture.
I've read in some of your writings, you talk about the difference between this ecclesia and kirka concept, where the ecclesia is a group of people and the kirka is actually the building, the place, the house of the Lord. Talk to me a little bit about how maybe one of the mistakes, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I'll use it anyway, maybe one of the mistakes that as church leaders that we make when we're managing the church, we manage the kirka as opposed to the ecclesia, and that may get us off mission.
Well, when you put the emphasis on the street address,
Okay.
then I think it is going to limit your effectiveness.
Okay.
I mean, statistically that's true. You've taken 80% of the people off the map.
Okay.
And when Jesus said, and we call it the Great Commission, because it's a great idea,
Right.
that it isn't about the world coming into a building, it's about the people of Jesus, the Christian community, going into the world. And that's the key. The ecclesia you got to keep focused on is not the kirka, it's not the German term that we get our word church from.
Right.
It's not a building. And yet, if you speak with your congregation or the people that you know who are Christians and you talk about church, immediately the first thing that comes to mind is a building.
You have a little phrase that you've coined that I read about that I like, and that is, church is not a place you go, it's people you
know.
Yeah. And so our goal primarily as pastors is not necessarily to get them through the front door, although you wouldn't minimize that either, would you?
No, I certainly don't minimize it. We hold services. We hold a lot of services. We have 4 campuses presently, and we have a lot of people coming through the doors of those buildings. And yet, the church experience on the weekend is not the church experience that we're looking for.
Okay.
The church experience on the weekend is to prepare people for the church experience we're looking for, which takes place in the world. If 100% of the people in the United States go to church every day,
Okay.
because we're the ecclesia,
Oh, wow.
and you want to use the weekend as your primary metric when only 2 out of 10 Americans go to church every week,
Okay.
well, when it comes to the whole idea of multiplication, that doesn't make sense. And so that's why we have really locked on to that idea of oikos, because it does give the opportunity for the church to fire on all cylinders.
I want to dive into some of the the concrete principles of Oikos. Okay, we know that it's 8 to 15 people that God has supernaturally and strategically placed on the front burner of your life that He wants to reach for the one thing all of them have in common, which is you.
Right.
And you would say that principle, that Oikos principle, that dynamic has been true with up to 95%
Right.
of every single person who's ever placed their faith in Jesus Christ.
Right.
95%, that's a big number.
Well, anytime somebody throws around 95,
Right.
especially when you're talking about 95 out of 100, you'll get a lot of raised eyebrows.
Okay.
Because that's a metric that Malcolm Gladwell would call an outlier.
Okay.
I mean, that's outside of the norm
Right.
when you're looking at a set of data.
Okay.
For example, you got 95% approval rating if
Right.
if you hold political office.
Right.
Well, anybody who runs against you in the re-election process is like an idiot.
Right,
If
right.
you've got 95%
Yeah,
approval rating,
right.
or if you have 95% disapproval rating. I mean, everybody ought to get into that race
Right.
because you're leaving office.
Right.
I mean, there's no conversation. If you had, if you know, the conversations we have with other pastors is about cancer treatment. If of all of the people who've been healed from cancer, 95% follow the same treatment regimen. Oncology would only be talking about that regimen.
Right.
95% of the most valuable players in every sports league had been born in your hometown. ESPN would be testing the water
Right.
in your hometown.
Right, right.
That 95 would be the conversation. But when it comes to ministry, even though 95% of the people who are in the family of God are in the family of God because of an oikos relationship, and yet for some reason we don't see the need to elevate that concept. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Is it just ignorance? Do you think pastors are just ignorant to the concept, or what? Why do you think more churches don't employ that principle?
Well, part of it is ignorance. Part of it is just not being confronted with the metrics.
Okay.
When Jesus said in Mark 5:19, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much I've done for you and how I've had mercy on you," He gave that to the guy who'd just been healed of a demon.
Right.
And the guy wanted to go along with Jesus.
Right.
He didn't want to go back home. But Jesus told him to go back home to
Right.
his own people. The word in the Greek is oikos.
Okay.
It's translated your own people.
Right.
And so it's not only a principle that Jesus taught, it's a principle that He modeled.
Okay.
It's a principle that is foundational for building the church throughout the centuries. I mean, 95% of the people who came to Christ when the church was born, 2,000 years fast forward to the church you happen to lead or I happen to lead today, the principle has never lost its dynamic.
Okay.
In fact, we don't introduce the principle to churches, even though we might introduce a word that kind of describes the principle. The principle itself has been in play in every church for as
Right.
long as there's been a church.
Well, if 95% of the people who've come to faith have come to faith through oikos, then every church in the world uses
Every
oikos.
church uses
Okay.
oikos, but they don't know it.
Okay.
Everywhere I go, I ask the question.
Okay.
And I would encourage a pastor or a class leader or a small group leader, you can ask the question in any setting. If you are a Christian, this is the question, if you're a Christian, how many of you would say that you came to Christ primarily because of the influence of someone in your oikos? And of course, an oikos is could be a family member, it could be a parent or a sibling or a neighbor or a classmate, somebody that may have been your friend who shared Christ with you or invited you to church. But if we had a one-on-one and I said, so how did you come to know Christ? And you were to, in reflecting, you were able to say, yeah, it's because of someone I knew in my oikos. I ask people, now that you understand oikos, how many of you would say, yes, it's someone in my oikos? Virtually everybody in the auditorium raises their hand.
Right.
And I did that with the church I lead.
Okay.
And then I started asking other churches.
Right.
Everywhere I go, I ask the same question. Chad, I never get a different answer.
Right.
Different denominations. I probably presented this principle to virtually every Protestant denomination there is
Okay.
on this country and in other countries.
Okay.
Oikos will be taught formally on 5 different continents this year. It doesn't matter what their church tradition is. It doesn't matter what their language that they speak happens to be. It doesn't matter what culture they're in. It doesn't matter if they're rich, if they're poor. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
Right.
Everything is different in every church except
Right.
this one thing.
Right.
In fact, I've even asked the opposite question just to make sure I'm clear
Right.
on what I'm seeing. Is I'll say, how many of you would say you came to Christ and a member of your oikos was not primarily involved in that process? Nobody raises their hand.
Okay.
I use the term 95, Chad, because I want to be conservative in my estimate.
95 is conservative.
95 is very conservative.
Okay.
In fact, in conversations post-workshop,
Right.
somebody will come up and I'll say, yeah, you didn't raise your hand. How did you come to faith? And they tell me how they became a Christian. And it is an oikos story. They
Right.
just don't really connect the dots. They think,
Okay.
well, I was in church and the pastor was preaching and I prayed to receive Christ. And well, who brought you to church?
Right.
Oh, well, my brother did.
Right.
Okay, well, that's an oikos
Right.
conversion.
Right, right.
When people tell me that I led them to Christ in a worship service, I always push back, say, brother, sister,
Yeah.
I appreciate the place
Yeah.
that God has given me in your spiritual journey,
Right.
but I didn't lead you to Christ.
Right.
I prayed a prayer with you,
Right.
but somebody else led you there.
Right.
So when we talk about leading people to Jesus, it's something the entire church family participates in.
But let's say a pastor is watching this today,
Right.
someone online watching this teaching today, and they're like, okay, I'm fascinated by the oikos principle, that it's 8 to 15 people that God has supernaturally and strategically placed on the front burner of my life. I get that. 95% of everyone who's in the body of Christ has come into the body of Christ through this principle. If I were a pastor, I'd want to know, okay, well, what do I need to do to implement this principle into the DNA of my church?
Yeah, the first thing you need to understand, I think, is that this is something that your church family could do.
Okay.
I know as a pastor, we're confronted with all kinds of ideas, and the first, grid that we have in processing those proposals is it's something that our church family can even be successful in.
Okay.
But this is something they can do. One of my favorite stories about teaching this principle, or one of my favorite experiences, is I was sharing with a friend of mine who is a pastor, and he was a little bit resistant to the idea, thought it was too simplistic of a way to view ministry. And I invited him to one of my presentations, and I said, if you're not going to buy into the oikos principle, at least come and hear the presentation so you know what you're saying no to.
Right.
So he showed up with his wife, and they sat about 2/3 of the way back in the middle of the room. And after the first part of the presentation, during the break, he came up and he was all like jacked up about it. He was all excited. And I said, well, what happened?
Yeah.
He said, Tom, it was the strangest thing. He said, in the middle of your talk, I was just sitting there listening, and my wife leaned over to me and said, she whispered, I can do this. And if he were here to explain what happened, he would say it was like the scales fell from his eyes, and he began to understand that this is something that God has given everybody, that everybody can do.
Right.
Oftentimes I say, Chad, if you think your job is to witness to everybody, you won't witness to anybody.
Right.
It's just too big a job. But if you understand that there are 8 to 15 people, God has supernaturally and strategically placed on the front burner of your life, that is your little slice of the pie. And he's given you something, not more than you can handle. He's given you something that you can do. We can talk all day about the 8 to 15 metric and why it's 8 to 15. You don't have, well, you might.
Yeah.
Most people don't have the social energy to service in a serious, focused way more relationships than 15.
Let's take that phrase, your own people. It's a powerful oikos derivative given to us in the New Testament. And if you were teaching the folks watching today, exactly how do you go home to your own people? I think in your book you call it the Oikos Challenge. Break this down. There's 5 steps to it.
Well, nothing is new to the basic idea.
Okay.
Share Christ with your family and friends.
Right.
But there's never, at least for me, there was never presented a clear strategy for what that looks like.
Yeah, for me growing up, it was soul winning, right? You had to go knocking on doors and confronting people that you didn't know, and that wasn't.
And how'd that work out for you?
Yeah, never. I've through all the counseling now.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's just, it is what it is. I mean,
Right.
that's the way we grew up. I've never heard anybody in a public setting or even personal conversations say, how'd you come to Christ? Well, man, I was just sitting at home watching the football game and some dude knocked at the door.
Right.
I just never have heard that. I'm not saying it hasn't happened.
Right.
I've heard thousands of people tell me personal stories about how someone in their oikos either demonstrated their faith or discussed faith with them and brought them to Christ. So our emphasis with the mission God has given us is not to introduce an idea, because it's already there at a church, but to leverage that idea in a way that makes it more efficient. We want to accelerate the oikos principle by simply giving intent to it. And so what we've done is we've developed a 5-step Oikos challenge.
So let's start with step number 1.
So the first step in managing an Oikos is to decide who is in your Oikos. And we just use the word list.
Okay.
Just make a list.
Make a list.
And sometimes people look at us like we're overstating the obvious, but you can't change the world until you frame the world.
Okay.
And so when we say, I want you to make a list of your 8 to 15, who are the people that you do life with? Who are the people that know whether or not you really are a Christ follower? One of the ways to explain who actually is in an Oikos is by saying, if you were to declare to the entire world that you love Jesus, billions of people would hear you,
Right.
because it was the entire world that somehow
Right.
you were able to communicate with.
Right.
But only 8 to 15 people would know if you're telling the truth.
Oh, wow.
Because it's not something that you just talk about, it's something you own in your
Right,
life.
right.
And there are 8 to 15 people that would say, I know that Tom Mercer is a Christian. Now, there are thousands who believe I am a Christian,
Right.
as I especially have this role as a pastor. But the ones who know me best, the ones who see the way I live my life, behind closed doors, behind the curtain of this big stage that God has placed people like me on, that's my Oikos. And I have to, you have to, if we want to get serious about this, we've got to make a list of them.
It's literally as easy as writing down.
Yeah, we publish little cards that look a little bit like the cover of the book. You know,
Okay.
the branding is similar.
Right.
But it's a card that you would keep somewhere, you know, in your Bible or wherever you could access it readily. And it has a place for you to list these names. And you just start focusing on those people intentionally.
Okay.
So you get the list. And then you begin to pray.
Okay.
You begin to pray every day for them. And again, this isn't rocket science. This is a very simple idea that anybody can do. Just like my friend's wife said, I can do this. Any of us can start praying every day for the people God has supernaturally
Right.
and strategically placed in our lives.
What's a prayer like that look like?
Well, there are people on your Oikos list that are non-believers. There are
Yeah.
some who are believers. Because remember, an Oikos is made up of everybody that you do life with.
Right.
My wife Cheryl is the number 1 name on my Oikos list.
Okay.
I pray for her every day. I
Okay.
just love her, obviously, and she's walking with the Lord, a very godly woman. I pray she'll stay that way.
Right.
Because some don't.
Right.
And I'd really love it if she did.
Right.
And I want to be available to her. You'll notice in this process, every time you pray for someone on your Oikos list, it's a prayer for yourself, that you would be there for them.
Okay.
That you would be all that God wants to use you to be for them. So it's a prayer for your Oikos, it's a prayer for your own personal maturity to become a better disciple of Christ. So it's kind of a full court press on all relationships. There's some who are on the list, maybe Christians, but they're not walking with the Lord. They attended church as a kid, maybe fell off the wagon at some point, had a bad experience, got distracted by something. And boy, your prayer for them is that they begin to focus once again on their spiritual journey. And then there are those that are just non-believers.
Right.
And they need Christ. And so that's an obvious prayer. But it's not just a prayer for them. It's a prayer that you would have answers for their questions. That you would be a better Christian, to provide an example of what a Jesus follower is supposed to be like. I mean, let's face it. The view that people have of Christians is all media driven.
Right.
Until we become very intentional about changing those opinions by demonstrating faith and discussing faith in a natural way.
So we're going to make a list.
Yes, we are.
We're going to pray for them every day.
Every day.
And then,
And then we're going to invest in their lives.
okay.
And that's just being intentional.
Okay.
How can I create conversations? How can I have them over for dinner? How can I go to ball games with them? You know, when I talk about making a list, it's important to remember that you don't pick your Oikos. Your Oikos is picked by God. You simply identify who's in your Oikos.
That's a big deal.
It's a very big deal because we would tend to pick people that we feel very comfortable with.
Right.
That are our kind of people, the people that we like to hang with, like to be with. Jesus picked them for whatever reasons he did.
Mm-hmm.
He decided that you would be the best or one of the best. They might actually find their name, if they understood the system, they might find their name on a number of different Oikos cards, because obviously we have interacting relationships that provide these Oikos networks the chance to dovetail together. But yeah, it's a matter of now just deciding how can we invest our lives. And investment requires time. Sometimes it requires money. We talk about investment as a financial idea.
Right.
And it might be,
Okay.
as we really focus on those 8 to 15 people.
So we make a list,
We do.
pray for them every day,
Yes.
invest our life into theirs.
Yes.
And then number 4.
Invite them.
Well-
Invite them to church.
Okay.
Invite them to a worship service. Invite them to a service, a special Easter, Christmas Eve service. Invite them to a small group.
Right.
Come over and hang out with other Christian friends that you meet with on a regular basis. Invite them to Starbucks just to have coffee with you. Remember, you are the church.
Right.
You know, we talk about the church as a place you go.
Right.
The church, Jesus said, is the ecclesia.
Right.
That's a group of people you know.
Right.
And so when I invite you to Starbucks, spend some time with me, I'm inviting you to church.
Okay.
And we're just going to hang out and develop a relationship. But truly, the invitation, we talk a lot about inviting people to church. Without the list, the prayer, and the investment, usually invitations don't go very far.
Right.
And that's why pastors have been saying, invite your friends and family to church without developing a platform for that.
Yeah, because if you don't have a relationship with people, they're not going to listen to you.
Well, no, they don't think you care.
Right.
And I still remember when I was growing up, we'd invite our friends to Sunday school so that we could win a prize.
Right.
We could win a trip to Disneyland
Right.
if we got more friends to church than anybody else did. And I'm thinking, if I'm on the other side of that, I grew up in church, so I was never on the other side of that. If I was on the other side of that, I'm thinking, really, you want me to come to church so you can go to Disneyland? There just seems to be a little bit of shallowness there. I don't know.
Right. So make a list.
Yes.
Pray for them each and every day. Invest your life into theirs.
Invite them.
Invite them to
Right.
church, and then
Well, the last one is prepare.
prepare.
And
Okay.
and I know that when we go to church on the weekends, and we go to our worship service, our small groups, we get involved in ministry by expressing the gifts, spiritual gifts God's given us to minister to the body of Christ. That's what we call church as
Okay.
pastors. We want you to be involved in church. But until you give people a good reason to be involved in church, why would they want to be involved in church?
Right.
But when they're there to prepare, to facilitate this personal mission that God has given them to their 8 to 15, then even going to a formal church setting becomes it's compelling. It becomes something that is a natural part of the call that God has placed on your life. God did not call the world to come to church.
Okay.
He commissioned the church
Oh wow.
to go into the world.
Yeah.
And you know, Chad, today, 2 out of every 10 Americans attend a church service,
Right.
which means we have an 80% failure rate
Right.
if the weekend is church. 100% of Americans go to church every day because they interact with people who are believers, who are Christ followers.
Okay.
And so I'm just thinking in terms of metrics. What's the most effective way to grow a church? Is it to wait until the 20% come to the weekend, or can we somehow mobilize the 100% to go out every day? So we have multiplied it by 400% internally, plus we've multiplied it by 7 times because we're not just waiting on the weekends, but we're engaged every day.
Yeah, I could see this, that number 5, being prepared to be used by God. I could see some Christians saying, well, I don't know enough yet to engage my oikos, and they can move that prepare up to the number 3 spot. So I'll make a list, I'll pray for them every day, but then I'm going to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to prepare, 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 and we're going to do this and do that. Next thing you know, you never get around to them, right?
Sure.
Do you experience that a lot?
No.
No?
The prepare is going on the whole time.
Right.
Like if we're saying that prepare is going to church and just becoming better at doing this mission to your oikos, it really is something that's laying the bedrock for 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
So you're preparing while you're listening, while you're praying, while you're inviting, while you're investing while you're inviting. But I think that the key to the idea of number 5 is to recognize that what you do at church matters for what you do during the week.
Okay. So if I was a pastor and I wanted to implement oikos into the DNA of my church, I would simply get up and teach the 5 steps, and the church would take off?
And you'd never look back.
Okay.
But the answer to your question is no.
Okay.
And that's what pastors make the mistake of thinking,
Okay.
because when you look at 5 steps, you're looking at a program.
Okay. Okay.
And church is not a program.
Okay.
Church has a purpose, and that's to prepare people to fulfill their personal mission to their oikos, but oikos is not a program either. No, what we would say is that there are 2 sides to the oikos principle. There's the personal side, which
Okay.
is to focus on your 8 to 15 with those 5 steps. And we do train people intentionally at a lot of different levels to pursue those five steps, to pursue their oikos, focus on their oikos. But then there's the pastoral side, or the
Okay.
church leadership side.
Okay.
And I would say that pastors acclimate to this very, very quickly. I was asked by a friend to provide a list of pastors who heard the principle presented at one of our workshops that didn't like it or resisted it. And I honestly couldn't come up with a list, because pastors love this idea. But the problem is they see invite your friends and family to know Christ, but now we have a word to call it, and that's
Okay.
all it is.
Okay.
But you can't give people a challenge without taking ownership yourself as a church leader.
So pastors got to do it.
Well, not just do it personally. I would say
Okay.
we can talk about that as
Okay.
well. This is something that you model for your church, certainly. But churches are not built for oikos. Churches are built for pastors to do primary ministry.
Okay.
Churches are built for weekends. That's why I say the weekend service and the pastoral office can be bottlenecks to changing the world. Now, I'm not saying they're not important. Our weekends are important. I'm a pastor. I would like to think there's something important to
Right.
what I do.
Right.
So our pastors are very important. But the most important thing is that people take ownership of the mission.
Okay.
And we talk all the time as church leaders, as pastors, about handing the mission off, but we really don't want
Right.
to,
Right.
because we have become dependent on them looking to us for everything. We have become dependent on them coming into our buildings on the weekends and hearing us preach, because that gives us self-worth. That gives us a boost in our personal esteem, because we're successful. And so we love large crowds. We want more and more
Right.
people to come on the weekends. I don't even care if people say, I can hardly wait to come back to church next weekend. That is never my intent, that people would want to come back to church the next weekend as their what fuels them as they leave the auditoriums that we teach in. I would like for them to say, not, I can hardly wait to come back next weekend. I would like for them to say, I can hardly wait to get to work tomorrow.
Okay.
I can hardly wait to go to school tomorrow, because there are people I've been praying for that need to understand what I heard today. Now I have another piece of information that can better prepare me to reach my 8 to 15. I can hardly wait to get to them in order to apply this information. So there is a purposeful church, but most churches are not structured for that kind of a purpose. And if you're a pastor and you cast vision, I would simply ask, what good is your vision if the structure at your church doesn't support it?
Okay.
There is really nothing new about oikos. Invite your friends and family to church.
Right.
I mean, what's new about that?
Right.
Which is why a lot of churches never see this principle catch fire in their church, because you continue to issue the same mandate, share Christ with people, but you don't develop a structure at your church to support, the personal mission that people
I could
have.
see that happen, because, if a pastor gets up there and he teaches these principles, there's got to be some evaluation on behalf of the pastor to evaluate, would someone actually want to invite their oikos to our worship experience?
Right, and that has fueled a lot of conversations, Chad,
Right.
about making our worship services better,
Right.
or more seeker friendly,
Okay.
which I'm all about.
Okay.
I think that we do need to do what we can to remain relevant, at that level. On the other hand, it's not just making your church services better. It's making oikos the primary focus of your mission.
Okay.
We have developed this Laser Church resource for pastors. I call it a diet regimen for churches,
Okay.
because churches aren't healthy, they're fat.
Okay.
They've given their parishioners too many things to eat, too many things to do. Churches have ballooned in terms of programs, emphases, and they do everything, so they're really not doing anything.
Okay.
They've gotten to the point, I think we have gotten to the point where we have to begin to focus on the Great Commission. The Great Commission is great because it's the only one Jesus gave us.
Right.
And Jesus said, I want you to go and make disciples and bring people into the kingdom of God, and we're gonna make this thing, we're gonna set this thing on fire. It's gonna take over the world in 2,000 years. Now,
Exactly.
he didn't say that.
Right.
But in hindsight, we've seen
Right.
in 2,000 years, it's been incredibly efficient
Right.
as a model for bringing people into the kingdom of God. Chad, 95%
Yeah.
of the people who know Christ came to Christ that way. So we just got to focus on it and be very specific about what we expect from people. We call it a partnership at High Desert Church. We want to form a partnership. We don't have membership, we have partnerships.
Right.
Where people can partner with Jesus. It's not just a mission, it's a co-mission.
Right.
We become Christ's partner. We partner with our pastor. We partner with each other because we've all been called to the same ministry. We've all been called to the same mission, and that's bring people to Christ. The only difference between us is you have 8 to 15 different people than what God has given me.
Right. And you think churches need a laser focus on that mission?
Absolutely. I tell the story of my grandson. I was babysitting him when he was just like 3 years old, and it was Pops and little Cade. So I'm over at my daughter and son-in-law's house babysitting their son, my grandson, and he starts jumping on the couch. I said, hey man, you can't jump on the couch. And he kept jumping. I said, Cade, you gotta stop jumping on the couch. If your mother or father were here, they would not let you jump on the couch. And he said, yes, they would. And I said, they would? And I said, Cade, your mother would let you be jumping on that furniture right now. He said, yeah. I'm thinking to myself, man, I raised that girl. There's no way on God's green earth that she would allow that. So finally I said, tell me the truth. She'd let you jump. And you could see the look on his face change. And he said, well, when she's not in the room, she lets me. But when she's in the room, she doesn't let me. And of course, where was his mother? She was not in the room, right?
Right.
So she, in his little way of seeing things, let him jump on the couch. Why do I share that? That's the way it is with the Oikos principle. When Jesus was in the room,
Right.
this is what he taught us.
Right.
But then he left the room, and we've come up with all these ideas for bringing people to Christ. 2 out of 10 Americans are coming to church.
Right.
You know, and I have a lot of fun with pastors when I present this principle, but I say, okay, you're at this conference for a reason.
Right.
You are following your own programs
Yeah.
to bring people to Christ. So how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And if it was working, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
So why don't we just go back to what Jesus taught us from the very beginning? Go home to your own people
Right.
and tell them what I've done for you and how I have had mercy on you. Well, that's really the call of the church, is to prepare people for that mission, for them to go home to their oikos and tell them what God has done for them and how he's had mercy on them.
You've written this book. Thousands of people have purchased this book. You have literally trained thousands, if not tens of thousands, of pastors and church leaders on the principle of oikos all around the country. You now have got a brand new system out, an online system called Laser Church, the Oikos strategy for church growth, on how you train leaders. You've got a small group curriculum that you have created and developed. You've got one for the members of a church called the Everyday Joe's Guide to World Change. You've got more than just a little bit of a beta test here.
Right.
Pastors who have tried this concept onto their church, what are pastors saying about how effective is it?
Well, pastors love the idea
Okay.
because it states in a succinct way what they've always been trying to communicate, and that's to help people that you know, your friends and your family know Christ, because that's part of sharing the gospel. Always has been part of the message of sharing the gospel the pastors have deployed for their congregations. So really what the Oikos principle does, it gives you a language to speak that your church family can latch onto and begin to elevate the idea to a point where it becomes part of the natural conversation in that particular local church. Pastors, they love it. They sit in the workshops or hear it presented, and they come up after we have conversations, and they're ready to go. Actually, when this whole thing began for me, I have a full-time job at High Desert Church,
Right.
and have for over 30 years, and so when this mantle, I guess you could call it, was placed on me, it was a little bit awkward because I had no aspirations to
Right.
become a traveling presenter or a workshop leader. I was just happy to be the pastor of a local church, a growing and dynamic local church, a
Right.
very healthy local church. I mean, I was fulfilled in that. First time, though, I was asked to present outside of our church about 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago, and after I presented the Oikos principle, I had hundreds of these pastors and church leaders say, "Do you have a book
Right.
so we can take the conversation home?" And I said, "Well, no, but I'll email you my membership class notes," because that's all I had, and I did.
Okay.
But it reminded me that there is a need, and it would be helpful if there was a pretty simple explanation that we could put in book form, which we did. And then pastors said, we need a small group curriculum, get our small groups talking about it. So we generated that. We did all these things in-house. We weren't that sophisticated, and even to this day, we're just kind of making this up as we go, because
Right.
now pastors, years later, are getting back to us saying, we love the idea, but it's just not catching on with the church family.
Right.
And in those conversations, and man, we've had hundreds of them, we recognize that pastors have some work of their own to do.
Okay.
Because it doesn't matter, Chad, if you've got the most amazing vision for your church like ever, if the structure of your church is not designed to support the vision, your vision is worthless.
Okay.
And so pastors are needing, I think, to take another look at their systems, their ministry systems, and the structure of their church, to see if what they are and what they do actually supports the Oikos mission that you're trying to hand off to the church family that you lead.
Tom, I want to jump in here. We've asked our church leaders and pastors from around the country to submit some questions, and we've gotten dozens of them. We've selected a few that we'd like to simply address to you. And if you're listening with us today, be sure to grab a pencil and paper, because this is sort of the heart of Oikos. But before you get to these, before you answer these questions, I'd love to let our audience know about Laser Church, this product that you've developed for church leaders around the country. So tell us a little bit about Laser Church.
Yeah, Laser Church is a resource for leadership teams to process together. We've got a book, Common Sense is the New Brilliance, and we've divided that up into 13 chapters. We've provided 26 different videos that give a team the opportunity to watch a video for a few minutes. There's a listening guide, there's a question and answer guide, and so it should be a pretty good conversation. But 26 gives you the chance to have a conversation for 6 months if you have a meeting every week. And that was the intent, to just help a group of leaders get started. Church leaders are very intuitive people. They're very smart people. Sometimes they need a little encouragement, maybe, to get some ideas. We all do. But once the ball's rolling, I believe that Laser Church will help them find that pathway to becoming an Oikos-centric church that they want to become.
Right. And there's so much about this product. You provided us with a video, so why don't we roll this video about Laser Church, and when we come back, you're going to answer more questions on the Oikos principle.
One of the primary goals of the local church is to reach a community for Jesus. If you are like most pastors, you spend countless hours every year trying to come up with ways to attract new people. We fill our calendars with events, spend thousands of dollars on outreach, and try to be as innovative as possible with our messages and ministries in an attempt to be more relevant. But what if I told you there is a way for you to reach more people, and it wasn't going to cost you thousands of dollars, or require dozens of meetings, or even require a personal makeover to make you look more hip? What if I told you there was a strategy that could help you simplify your church, could transform your discipleship process, could give more meaning to your small groups, and at the same time could teach your church family how to become outward focused? Would you be interested? Hi, I'm Danette, and I want to introduce you to the Oikos strategy for church growth. Most people think the word oikos means yogurt, but it is actually a Greek word that means household or family or circle of influence. And it is through an oikos that 95% of all believers since the very beginning of the church age have come to know Jesus. 95%. In fact, it is probably an oikos relationship that led to your becoming a believer. In the oikos strategy for church growth, you will learn that a typical oikos is made up of the 8 to 15 people whom God has supernaturally and strategically placed in your life, and how God wants to reach those people through the one thing they all have in common: you. This is the simplest but most effective idea that Jesus ever gave us to bring people into the kingdom of God. We want to show you how you can help your church laser focus on that idea, which we call the oikos principle. Hundreds of pastors around the country are now using that principle to transform their churches and communities. In fact, the High Desert Church in Southern California has grown from 150 active people to over 12,000 using these same principles. And their lead pastor, Tom Mercer, will be sharing what he has learned on his journey as an oikocentric pastor. Now, there are no promises that your church will have that type of exponential growth, but one thing is for sure. When a church gets laser focused on their mission, amazing things can happen. At Laser Church, we are committed to helping you and your church reach more people. So we have packaged these training sessions in a simple, step-by-step sequence to help you and your team embrace this dynamic principle. There are video trainings you can use to teach your entire team, materials that you download and print to help make the training portable, dynamic interviews with some of our country's most respected church leaders, dozens of done-for-you resources, and practical tips for immediate implementation. We are so confident that these trainings will transform your church. We are offering a 7-day free trial for you to test drive the system. You really have nothing to lose, so I want to invite you to continue to check out this site and then join the Laser Church team and hundreds of other pastors around the country in learning the oikos strategy for church growth and reach more people, 8 to 15 at a time.
In just a minute, Tom is going to get back to teaching us on this dynamic principle, but before he does, I've got to ask you a question. What do you think? I mean, you just were introduced to the oikos principle, and if you're anything like me, the very first time I heard it, my mind began racing and spinning on how we can implement this into the DNA of our church. And I want to just recap for you that we learned that an oikos is the 8 to 15 people that God has supernaturally and strategically placed on the front burner of your life. And that 95% of the people who are in the body of Christ are in His church because of an oikos relationship. Chances are that's how you came to Christ. I know that's how I came to Christ. And the role of the church is to equip and prepare its members, its ecclesia, to reach their 8 to 15. And Tom taught that an oikos is the simplest and most effective strategy that Jesus gave us to reach more people and to change the world. And it's so simple that people can actually say about the Great Commission, it's my mission. And just like the story that Tom gave in his teaching, your church members can say, you know what, I can do this. I mean, I can take the oikos challenge, the 5 steps. I can take 5 steps to turning the Great Commission into the Great My Mission. I can make a list. I can pray for them daily. I can invest my time in them. I can invite them to dinner or to small group or to church. I can show up to church every single week, and I can partner with my pastor to prepare to be used by God. I can do this. It's my mission. Well, let me ask you, pastors, why did you show up today? Perhaps you still believe that the Great Commission is God's plan to change the world, but for whatever reason, your church just doesn't seem to be winning the lost. Or perhaps you're not seeing a lot of first-time guests. Maybe your church is plateaued or declining, and you want to lead them back to vibrancy and relevance. Maybe you're experiencing ministry silos, and you need a system that's going to align every program around one simple but effective mission. Or maybe your church is just going through the motions. You come week after week after week, but not a whole lot of great things are happening. But you're the leader of that church, and you know that God isn't done with you yet. You can still be that beacon of light in your community. You say, hey, we're not dead, we're not done. We can do this. We may not be fancy, we may not have all the bells and whistles, but you know what we do have? We have 8 to 15 people that God has placed on the front burner of my life, and we can reach them for the glory of God. We can do this. And if that's you as a pastor, then I want to ask you just a couple questions. Maybe you're asking, how can I implement this principle into the DNA of my church? And how can I do all of this quickly? I mean, all of us pastors, we want to do everything quick, right? Well, before I tell you that, I want to tell you this. I want to motivate you and encourage you and tell you that it's your time. It's your time to laser focus your church with a vision that will empower your church members to fulfill the Great Commission. Now, what would that do to your church if they took ownership of that and they said the Great Commission is my mission? What would that do? How would that affect your leadership? How would that affect your teaching? It's your time to step up and to lead the way by resourcing your church leaders with a next level coaching system. A coaching system that takes all the guesswork out of the implementation of this dynamic principle. A coaching system that, when followed, will help your church experience a flood of first-time guests and baptisms. A coaching system that you can use to unite your board, your staff, and your lay leaders. A coaching system that you can use as a filter to make every decision in your church, whether it be programming or staffing or budgets. Oikos is going to help you do that. You need a coaching system that helps your church take ownership of the Great Commission so it becomes the Great My Mission. Now remember, Oikos is not a theory. As Tom says, it's the simplest and most effective strategy that Jesus gave us to reach more people and to change the world. And you want to reach more people. You want to change the world. Young people in your church want to change the world. And to help us do that, to help us learn this principle, and to help us lead this, Tom has put together the Oikos strategy for church growth. This is the complete A to Z blueprint to move your church from inward focused to laser focused on the Great Commission. And it's 100% online. You can get access to it immediately. You can download everything immediately. You don't have to wait for shipping or handling, and you don't need to worry about all of these, notebooks being on your desk. It's all available in the convenience of an iPad or of a computer or an iPhone. You can get it all immediately. Now, remember, Tom has taught this principle to thousands of pastors all around the world through his books and weekend workshops. And everyone resonates with this principle, as Tom was saying a little bit earlier in the teaching, because it's just so practical, but they're always asking for more. Well, the Laser Church Oikos strategy for church growth, this is more. It's a complete online coaching system designed to be used by you, your staff, your board, your ministry leaders, whenever, wherever it's convenient for them. Bill Stafiri, pastor of Beach Point Church down in Huntington Beach, says 6 Easters ago, we had about 500 people show up. We were averaging about 300 per weekend. This last Easter, we had 1,600. Now we average almost 900, and I can't tell you how many conversations were the results of people saying, I brought him or her off my 8 to 15 list. Our worldview is changing, and we feel it. Dr. Todd Crawford, a pastor up in Maryland, says, Real Life Church is built entirely on the Oikos principle. The ministry training of Pastor Tom Mercer has been a great help to keep us on track for how to build the Oikos thinking into every aspect of our operations and ministry. And I love this line. He says, Oikos is not a fad. It's not a program. It's simply God's plan to reach the whole world, and it's working here in our world. Jeff Wheeler, pastor up in South Dakota, says, the Oikos principle has brought clarity, focus, and simplicity to our ministry model. It has created a common language for our church and galvanized Christ's primary method of changing the world. Oikos is pretty amazing. So what do you get in the Oikos strategy for church growth? Well, Tom talked about it just a while ago, but what you're going to get is you're going to get a 167-page training manual that can make Oikos portable. You can teach from it. We've broken it down into 13 chapters. There's 26 teaching videos. You can binge watch them all at one time. You can watch one a week for half a year. You can watch a couple if you want to. You're going to get several done-for-you resources. We've traveled the country and we've interviewed some of the leading pastors and teachers and experts around the country, and we've interviewed them and talked to them on such topics about, how do you reach a younger generation, or how do you reach men, or how do you do evangelism in your church? These are dynamic teachings, and we're adding to it all the time. There's dozens of special bonuses for immediate implementation. We've put a few sermon series in there that you can get and you can use in order to teach the entire body on the principle. There's worksheets and cheat sheets and all sorts of items that you can use that is going to help you implement DNA. And we're adding to this regularly. Tom has given me a file of, 400, 500, 600 different documents on that. And I'm sorting through a little bit of them every single day and saying, hey, this will really help them. And we're adding them to our resource bundle in the Oikos strategy for church growth. And in chapter 1 of module 1, you're going to be able to laser focus on the formula that brought 95% of all believers to Christ. Chapter 2, you're going to laser focus on the Oikos Challenge. That's what Tom just taught you, the 5 steps of the Oikos Challenge. You're going to be able to laser focus that. Imagine taking this teaching that you just heard and being able to put this in front of your board or in front of your staff or in front of your influential leaders. Or perhaps you have a member or two that wants you to be a little bit more inward focused and you want them to be outward focused. Imagine putting this teaching in their hands. Chapter 3, you're going to be able to teach them how to grow your church through multiplication, not just addition. One of the best teachings in there is chapter 4 on how to unite your church around the mission. How do you unify your church? Chapter 5, how to create faith conversations with the unchurched. How do you do that? How do you break the ice, so to speak? Chapter 6, how to simplify your church and focus on the mission. Many of our churches, as Tom was saying, we're fat, we're heavy. Well, this chapter, this teaching that Tom does is going to show you how to slim down and how to say no to some good things so you can say yes to some great things. Chapter 7, you're going to learn how to transform your discipleship process. In chapter 8, you're going to learn how to reach more people through your weekend worship experience. How can you make Sunday morning a place that inspires the insider but attracts the outsider? Chapter 9, how do you reach more people through small groups? Chapter 10, how do you create a value system in your church that reaches more people? The value system where people say, we're coming here for a particular reason, and we're not going to let anything get in the way of us fulfilling the purpose that God has called us to. Chapter 11, how to reach more people through marketing. Chapter 12, how to turn church members into partners. And you're going to get a bonus module, and in fact, we encourage you to watch this one first. This is the 5 characteristics of an oikocentric church. If you put oikos into the DNA of your church, what can you expect? What will your church look like if you do that? Tom has invested a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money. We've hired the best people to film. We've got great, dynamic, awesome illustrations, video illustrations in there that you can use. It's very, very, very impressive. There's nothing cheap about this product. You're going to love it. Now, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get the complete Oikos strategy for church growth, and all of those trainings are available right now. They're 100% online. There's 26 teaching videos, training manuals, resources, interviews, and we've put over $3,000 worth of bonuses in there. And you're going to get access to a members-only Facebook group where you can go in there and interact with other pastors who are implementing oikos into their DNA, and they're going to help you with ideas, and you'll be able to pray with each other. You'll be able to encourage each other as you do this. But let's talk about the bonuses, okay? First, we told you to stay until the end, and we're going to give you the 7 steps to moving church members from consumers to promoters. You're going to see that in your inbox here in just a moment. But thank you so much for sticking around. Don't forget, Tom is getting ready to teach some more on this principle, so don't go anywhere. Okay, we're not done yet. But if you take action today, we're going to throw in some quick bonuses for you that honestly we've never given anybody before, and here they are. One of the bonuses is the Get Your Board on Board training. This is over 3 hours of video teaching of Tom on the Oikos principle. This is basically Tom's weekend workshop where he talks about such topics like the Oikos Challenge, 5 hours to change your world. He breaks down Kirka versus Ecclesia, so in other words, the organized church versus the movement of people. He breaks that down. He gives us several examples of the 20-60-20 principle. He talks about the ripple effect. And then he talks about the battle that divides your church. We've never made this available in its entirety before. If we did, we would sell it for about $1,000. Well, you're going to get this free today for taking action. Also, here's something we've never done before. Tom has put together a professional quality small group curriculum. It's a 3-week small group curriculum designed to motivate your church family to discover their life purpose and to create personal pathways to world change. And if you were to purchase this right now at oikosgroups.com, you're going to pay $349 for that. Well, today, if you take action right now, Tom is going to give you that entire system absolutely free today. Also, we told you earlier that you're able to get 100 copies of Tom's book for your staff and leadership team. Well, Tom is going to throw a license in there for you to get 100 copies of his book, a digital copy of his book, if you purchase today. And we're going to give you what's called the Everyday Joe's Guide to Reaching Their 8 to 15. Now, watch this, Pastor. You need this, okay? Not only are you going to get 100 copies of Tom's book, 8 to 15, The World is Smaller Than You Think, but you're also going to get an ebook called The Common Sense Guide to World Change. And what it is, it's just a couple pages long, 5 or 6 pages long, And what it is, it's the entire Oikos principle reduced down to 4 or 5 pages so you can put this in the hand of early adopters and influencers and get them on board with the Oikos principle. We've also put some things in there on how your church members can write out their testimony or their God story. We've given them a worksheet to do that. Everybody's going to get a digital copy of an Oikos prayer card, and we put together a Christmas devotional that you can roll around Christmas time called Rocked by a Baby that will help them focus on Oikos on one of the most pivotal seasons of the calendar year. We sell that right now for $15. That's the reduced rate. Actually, online it's $49, but the conference rate is $15, and at a webinar you can get it for $15 a person. We're going to give you 100 copies of this absolutely free. So that's $1,500 value that we're just throwing in. And so my question is are you ready? Are you ready to laser focus your church on this world-changing idea? And you say, you know what, Chad? Yes, I am. I'm ready, but, what's the investment? What's this going to cost me? We're a church. We don't have a big budget, and, we know that. And we can appreciate that. And people have been giving us counsel and influence on what we should build this at. And the industry standard for online systems like this around the internet is $1,997. That's the industry standard. But today, you can get it for $59 today, followed by 11 payments of $59. We've intentionally kept that price low so your church budget can absorb it. So the way to get this, you're going to go to www.laser.church/join. That's it. laser.church/join. And be sure to put the /join in there, because on the normal laser.church site, you can get the product, but it's actually 12 payments of $99. So it's actually $1,188 compared to what you're going to pay, 12 payments of $59. If you don't want payments, that's not a problem whatsoever. We can take one installment of $597 as opposed to $59. You'll save yourself a little bit of money there as well. But you can get started today. And if you do, you're going to get all those bonuses that we talked about. But it's only available today. Actually, not just today. It's only available until the end of this webinar. So you're going to get a $4,383 value, and I'll just recap, and then we're going to get over to Tom so he can answer some more questions for us. So you're going to get the entire Oikos strategy for church growth, which is a $1,188 value. You're going to get 7 ways to move customers to promoters. You're going to get the Everyday Joe's Guide to Reaching Your 8 to 15, plus we're going to give you 100 digital copies of Tom's book. You're going to get your board-on-board weekend workshop training, and you're going to get instant access to the small group curriculum, all of that for free when you purchase the Oikos strategy for church growth. And you can get that for 12 payments of $59, which is the most flexible, but the best value is one payment of $597. All you got to do is go to laser.church/join, and you can log in to the members area right there. So what's going to happen as soon as you pay for it, log in, you're going to get a couple of immediate emails with where you can click on those links, go in and set up an account that you can give to all of your staff and all of your church leaders, and they'll be able to log in and get instant access to all of the training, okay? You get the entire system for only $59. You get all the fast action bonuses and discounts, or one payment of $597. So 12 payments of $59 or one payment of $597. And don't forget, you get all of this, but you got to get it here before the training is over. Then I want you to go right now to laser.church/join, and you're going to get immediate access to everything. So hey, we're going to get back to Tom, and Tom's going to answer some more questions for us. We put a 15-minute timer on, and you can get the Oikos strategy for church growth at this $59 rate and get all of those bonuses for free. You can still purchase the system even after the webinar is over. You can go to laser.church and get that. But remember, the price goes up to $99 a month for 12 months, not $59, okay? And you don't get any of the bonuses. So you're going to have to purchase the small group curriculum on its own for $349. And the Everyday Joe's Guide you can get, but your people are going to have to purchase that for $15 per person, okay? The Get Your Board on Board training is not available. Let's see what else. Well, we're going to give you the 7 ways to move customers to promoters just for being on the webinar. So you're going to get that bonus regardless of whether you purchased or not. Now, this all may have sounded really salesy, but let me tell you this. we would love for you to purchase the system, absolutely. But if you don't, we're pretty confident that this webinar today, this master class, has really been helpful to you, and you've been able to garner a lot of great information. If you can't afford the $59, okay, if you just simply cannot afford that, okay, then at least get Tom's book. You can get that at tommercer.com. At least get his book and read it and understand the oikos principle a lot more. If you're a new church plant, okay, and you're less than 2 years old, we've got a special pricing specifically for you. So all you have to do is send us an email, chad@laserchurch.org, and we'll be able to get you a special discount for being a church planter. Well, this is the system, the Oikos strategy for church growth. It's a dynamic principle that we hope that you implement into the DNA of your church. We're looking to partner with you, okay, every step of the way. Anytime you need us, I'm available via email. Tom's available via email. You have direct access to us as we help you implement this. But let's get back, and I'm going to invite Tom to answer some more questions for us. We've asked our church leaders from all around the country to submit some questions for you. We've selected 4 or 5. One of the pastors wants to know, Tom from West Virginia wants to know whether his vision statement is consistent with the Oikos principle.
Yeah, well, his vision statement may or may not be, but a vision statement needs to reflect your vision for your church family.
Okay.
So it has to be fairly specific and focused.
Okay.
I have friends like you all over the world, and they're very wonderful leaders and very successful pastors. It is not uncommon, however, to give too many options in a vision statement.
Okay.
One of them that seems to show up in a variety of forms is upward, inward, outward, worship, discipleship, and evangelism.
Right.
And I told one of my very good friends who had that as a vision statement, I said, well, that'd never work at HTC, and he was a little taken aback. He said, why not? And I said, because you give people options.
Right.
I mean, they can worship. What will they always default to? If you give them 3 options, always default
inward,
inward.
Right.
They'll default to doing whatever can be done for me.
Right.
And then maybe I'll push upward and worship a little bit, but I'll never get outward. And in a church like that, somebody can fulfill the vision of the church at least 2/3 of the way, and they haven't fulfilled the vision of the church,
right,
which is to bring people to Christ. So I think a vision statement needs to be very, very specific about reaching people for Jesus. All the other things we do in church that has made their way into vision statements are very important,
right,
but that's not the vision.
Right.
Those things are part of the process to facilitate the vision of reaching people for Christ.
Tom from Phoenix, Arizona writes, he says, one of the struggles we're having in our church is our people seem to not have any unbelievers on their oikos list. And that seems to be a pretty big deal for churches. How do you combat that?
Yeah, the longer you're a Christian,
right,
the more often you would say that. But God has put on the front burner of our lives more non-believers than we have identified.
Okay.
What I do in our trainings is I encourage people to make their list. Usually their list is, the first draft is usually not accurate.
Right.
And then I encourage them to show the list to their elementary age children.
Okay.
Because kids have a radar for relationships.
Right.
And then they'll say, well, what about Johnny's mom and dad? You're at soccer practice 3 times a week with them. You're sitting there on the sidelines. What are you talking about?
Right.
They say, oh, we didn't think of them.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. We haven't been trained to think of the people God has already placed on our oikos.
And this is where those glasses come on, right?
Oh, yeah. Just got to train people to see what is right there in front of them.
Right.
But we have become so comfortable in going to a church service and hanging out with Christian friends and enjoying the music and the message, going to lunch, and that's church. Now,
if a someone from a congregation actually doesn't have anyone in their oikos, what are some practical steps that they can do to go get some people on the oikos?
Yeah, obvious. That would be a very rare experience where you wouldn't have a few.
Right.
Even a few.
Right.
But if you even started with a few and then just said, Lord, place on my heart, who is it that I'm missing?
Okay.
And I believe if Jesus wants to bring people into his kingdom and you're willing to be a vessel to that end, you think he's not going to answer that prayer?
Right.
So yeah, it's a matter of becoming intentional. Put on the glasses and just sit back and watch what shows up in right in front of you.
Hey, let's do another question. JD, he runs a church planning organization, and he wants to know about church plants and whether Oikos is a good system for church planters to implement in the DNA of the church as they're planting.
Yeah, I would say it's probably best for church planners.
Okay.
The two groups that the Oikos system works best for are churches that are broke
Okay.
and churches that are brand new.
Okay.
What do they share in common? Oh, it's
Maybe
overstating the
maybe
obvious.
desperation.
Well, yeah, they have
Yeah.
no resources.
Right. Right. Okay.
Churches over time get fat, just like
Okay.
we do.
Right.
And it just happens.
Yeah.
I mean, you start accumulating all these
Yeah.
things that you want your church to do,
Right.
or that the people in the church insist on doing,
Mm-hmm.
and you welcome them all, and pretty soon you've got this ministry that is doing everything except something Christ-like,
Right.
which is bringing people to Him.
Right.
So yeah, I would say if you're a church planner, man, you're right out of the gate. You're lean and mean, and you're a soul-winning machine. I mean, that's all you want to do. And then when your church, some people who have planted churches and have been a part of the process, the journey for a while, they oftentimes reflect back and they say the best years of this ministry were when we just got started.
Right.
I mean, we just wanted to bring people to Christ, and we had faith. It was a very simple experience. And then something horrible happened. They got money,
Yeah.
and then they started spending it.
Right.
And man, they got fat. And we actually call Laser Church a diet regimen for churches.
Oh, I like it.
It's harder for a church that's established and has become this kind of behemoth, floating on the top of the water, just kind of floating around.
Right.
It's hard for us to slim down because
Right.
it doesn't take anything to gain weight.
Right.
It takes discipline and effort to lose it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that's why pastors don't really, over the long term at least, find success, because their church doesn't want to slim down.
Let's take the opposite approach. Gary from the East Coast wants to know, how does he implement Oikos into the DNA of his very old and traditional church?
Yeah, that's the greatest challenge of all.
Right.
But if people are on board with the vision,
Right.
and that bringing people to Christ is that important.
Right.
There is no doubt church renewal or a church turnaround might
Right.
be a career-long project.
Right.
As it has been for me.
Right.
To see the things you want to see happen. I know Rick Warren said the two biggest mistakes we make is we don't dream big enough,
Right.
and we expect results too soon.
Right.
So you're in for the long haul. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Right. Right. But it's possible.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely possible. Well, Tom, thanks so much for taking some time with us today. I know that pastors all around the country and church leaders around the country are so grateful that you have decided to take the responsibility to take this very simple principle, but to elevate it and to laser focus it into the DNA of not just your church, but to help pastors implement it into the DNA of their church. One denominational leader told me that, there's nothing new about Oikos, but it sure is refreshing. And so thanks for bringing this to light.